at least once every month I get asked this question. I have guys that race at a few racetracks where they have rules where they're trying to level the competition by using restrictor plates. And all in all, restrictor plate racing on short tracks for lower ranks, I don't see it as being a bad idea. A lot of people will argue that restrictor plates on super speedways and NASCAR makes the racing horrible and follow the leader. But I think on for a local racer on a local level, in a street stock, a restrictor plate could actually be something that kind of really does help to level the field. And for obvious reasons. When you're taking horsepower away from cars on short tracks, you're doing just that. So I always get asked the question, what should we do to combat the downside of the restrictor plates, the less air that gets drawn into the motor, which ultimately means less fuel, which means less horsepower. So let's just look at a couple of the things. First, the reasoning behind using the restrictor plate. The main idea that I heard from most promoters is that they chose to do the restrictor plate to cut down on guys spending $20,000 and $30,000 on an engine, which is probably not going to happen. Somebody that wants to win is going to spend as much money as they can spend to win at whatever cost. That's what it is, win at whatever cost. So I don't think it really cuts down on what people are going to spend. What it does cut down on is it's going to cut down on wear and tear on engines. It's not going to allow a guy that has a $20,000, $30,000 430, for example, to go out there and blow the tires off and disintegrate an engine, and then have to go back and build another one. It's going to limit basically how much throttle they can apply to the car. On super speedways, a lot of NASCAR teams have different ideas about how to combat the restrictor plate. I've never once heard anyone say that they wanted to limit the air that goes into the motor. So you have to look at it like this. The restrictor plate is basically limiting how far you can push down the accelerator pedal. So where would you first start to combat that problem? If it was me, I would approach it by looking at the intake first. Control your air at the top of the intake near the restrictor plate. I would never opt for smaller ports on big engines to increase velocity at those. I mean, because ultimately you're just limiting how hard you can push down on the accelerator pedal, how far you can open up the butterflies. And you wouldn't put small ports on a 430 cubic inch motor. Nobody would ever run 140cc runners on a 410 inch motor. You wouldn't do that if you didn't have a restrictor plate, so why would you do it if you did have the restrictor plate? What you could look at are the operating conditions. You could look at the weight of the rods, for instance, the weight of the crank, the cubic inches, the total volume that the engine has demand for. More cubic inches means that if I have a 400 cubic inch engine, every time that piston goes down, it wants to draw in a certain amount of air, and if that air can't be drawn into the cylinder, then that is drag created inside the engine. That's horsepower defeating itself, in a sense. I always tell guys, opt for lighter crankshafts, lighter rods, lighter pistons, as light as you can go, and then ultimately sometimes smaller cubic inches. Then focus on the efficiency of that engine. Instead of maybe having 2% of leakage at a valve, maybe shoot for 0.5%. Instead of running 15 thousandths clearance on your piston rings, maybe run 10. Try to draw as much air into the engine as you can. Focus on the things that you can combat. Friction, coated cylinders, coated bearings, lightweight synthetic oil, things like that. But never try to limit, you know, the abilities of the engine, because it's just a restrictor plate that's ultimately acting as a limit to how much pedal you can apply. And just keep that in mind in your ventures, and you might make better decisions, and you may find that the pieces that you have in your shop right now will get you through the season just as well as a $750 cylinder head that was probably not going to help your program. And I'm sure that the guy listening to me say this right now knows who I'm talking about. Opt for lighter parts and less cubic inches when you're dealing with restrictor plates and more compression, because you're not going to be pushing the engine as hard, so you can push it a little bit further.